How to build a major gift system for life in 2026. Now, I don't know about you. I have been a fundraiser for 20 years, and the advice that I got, particularly about major funders, seemed to be a lot of the old recycled blah, blah, blah. Like call people up, invite them for coffee, do a wealth screen, see if they have capacity. And then at some mysterious point in time, maybe I use a moves management system, maybe I don't, maybe I just go off of vibes. At some mysterious point of time, I'm supposed to ask them for money. Now, here's a lot of the reason why people burn out. This system simply does not work anymore. Donors are not sitting there waiting to get your phone call. They are not excited to go for a coffee meeting or a site visit with you. They want to know what it is you want. Most donors, especially high net worth, high capacity donors, are going to self cultivate and self solicit. They don't need you to invite them to coffee. And so, what ends up happening in this old model of fundraising is that we have a list of names. Maybe we have 400 plus prospects. We have no real indication of who is actually interested. And so, we just cold call a bunch of people, hoping that someone sticks their head up. And by the way, they mistrust you because they haven't heard from you, that you haven't built the relationship. And so, the minute they stick their head out, we then rush this to the solicitation after maybe some perfunctory cultivation, hoping that we get them while they're paying attention. Frankly, this doesn't work. It's burning out your donors and it's burning out your team. Now, meanwhile, we also know that there are more high capacity donors than ever before. In fact, the AI revolution is minting millionaires at unprecedented rates. How we know this is that we have donor advised funds being opened at crazy rates. I think in the last 3 years, the number of DAFs have grown by 75%. So we know the capacity is out here. What we really need is to build a system that works for today's fundraisers and today's donors. Today, I'm going to walk you through what a major gift system looks like. And it's not the old model of chasing people, hoping that someone will meet you for coffee. It is a consent-based system made for today's donors. And what I will say is I want to credit and shout out Greg Warner and the team at MarketSmart because they are the ones who came up with this strategy and it works. Now, before we even get started on building our major gift system, the thing that we have to do first and foremost is to shift our mindset. The best fundraisers are not the ones out here pitching people, talking like a used salesman, saying a magical combination of words, hoping that somehow, some way, some abracadabra, open sesame word will unlock a gift. No, no, no. The best fundraisers are the ones who see themselves as philanthropic advisors. If you imagine that every single donor that you have is on their own heroic journey, they're their own Luke Skywalkers, then our role as fundraisers should actually be to be the Yodas, the mentors, the guides, the people who help them to achieve what they want to achieve. Now, what is it that they want to achieve? Well, quite simply, this is a very human impulse. We want to belong. We want to be important. We want to be seen. We want meaning. We want purpose. And so the more that I, as a fundraiser, can help my donor achieve the dream that they have for themselves and their families and the vision of the life and victory that they seek, the more likely they are to work with me. Now, one of the fundamental mistakes that I see fundraisers make is that they don't think about what it is donors want. They don't think about the meaning and purpose that they're giving to their donor and what value they're adding to the donor. They're only thinking about themselves. They're only thinking about how can I get them to do the thing that I want them to do. It's a little bit like being on a date. You know, if you're on a date, if you're with someone who's actually trying to connect with you, or if you're with someone who just wants to talk about themselves and how great they are. Don't be that person. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. There is a 6-step process that is going to look very similar to what a lot of us have come up with, but it's different in some very fundamental ways. And I will tell you that one of the biggest differences is we're building a consent-based system. So What we're doing with our donors is that we are being clear and we're getting consent at every step of the process. So by the time we get to the transaction, by the time we get to the gift, they have been partners all along the way. And I think this is the fundamental shift that I want us all to make. I will die on this hill. If you're listening to this as a fundraiser, please think about this as you design this out. I am not interested in baiting and switching. I'm not interested in trying to convince someone to do something that they don't want to do. I am interested in building partners. So let's talk about the 6 steps of the process. Step number 1, engagement. Now, the mistake that a lot of us make is that we start from the place of identify. We think about who are the donors that would be the perfect donor for me? Inevitably, it usually ends up being something like someone in their 50s in tech and finance. Now, that's all well and good. But instead of starting from the place of identify, and by the way, a lot of times I see people confusing identify and qualify. So identify usually is like, well, we look at our database and we do a wealth screen, and anyone who looks like they have money, we've identified as a prospect. No, 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 no. Start first from the place of engagement. Look at who's already in your database. Look at who is opening your emails. Look at who's clicking through your emails. Look at who's responding to you. Look at who shows up at your events. Look who's actually willing to take your phone calls. Start there. These are the people who are most engaged with you. This is the low-hanging fruit. Now, I can already hear you saying, but Ria, how do I know that they even have money? The truth is, you don't necessarily at this point. And that is okay. We want to start talking to people who already like us, who are already engaged with us. I think we also make the mistake of thinking that a wealth screen equals a prospect. I've done podcasts before about why wealth screens are an imperfect tool. I'm not against wealth screens, but I don't think it is the most thorough data point. Why? Because wealth screens are only looking at publicly available data. And the truth is, a lot of the folks who have capacity have assets that aren't publicly available. For example, DAFs are not publicly available information. Personal assets are not publicly available information. Maybe you have a private trust, not publicly available information. So there is a lot that the public wealth screens cannot uncover. And I think the mistake is that when we look at the wealth screen as the potential source of truth. Now, we're going to talk about how we actually determine capacity, but let's start here. So instead of identification, I want you to look instead at engagement. Who's actually in your list? Who's actually already engaging in some kind of way? These are people who maybe connect with you on social media, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Then we move into a 2-step qualification process. Now, this is a mistake that I see everybody making, which is that you think qualification means that, well, I got their name, I did a Google search, I maybe saw who else they gave to, I did a wealth screen, and therefore they are qualified to give. Not so, friends. Just because somebody has money does not mean that they are qualified for you. It just means that maybe they have money. So here's where we build in the steps. The first step is a pre-qualification, and a pre-qualification can take the form of one of 2 things, either a survey or a conversation. In this pre-qualification step, we are looking at 5 different components. Component 1 is capacity. So that is when we are looking at things like assets, like do you have a DAF? Do you have a family foundation? Are you interested in giving in stock or crypto, or you have a qualified charitable distribution? Remember, major gifts are gifts of assets, not of income. However, we're not done yet. All we've ascertained at this point is that you have some capacity. Here are some other elements that are equally important. 2, are you engaged with us? Are you on our newsletter? Do you come to our events, right? The likelihood that I'm going to be a qualified giver is probably much higher if I'm engaged with you in some kind of way. 3, do I have a reason for giving? Think about all of the possible nonprofits in the US alone. It's 1.8 million nonprofits. Why would I give to you? It usually has something to do with an intersection in my personal life. So think about your own giving. I'm going to guess that likely the organizations that you give the biggest to are the ones that have had some kind of direct impact in your life. Maybe it's one of the schools that you've attended. Maybe it's a nonprofit that has helped a friend or a family member. Maybe you've adopted your dog from one of these. There has to be a reason because not every single person is going to be interested in every single thing. So when we're asking the reason, it's actually a gift to our donor because we are allowing them to reflect on what is meaningful to them. Now, you may be listening to this and thinking you're going to go out and survey your audience. Please do not do that. I beg of you. This survey has to be very specifically worded and it has to live within the context of a whole system. So let's get back to it. So it's capacity, it is reason, it is engagement. Then it's timing. What sort of timeline are they thinking about? Are we thinking like 3 to 6 months? Maybe right now is not the time for us to engage, right? Maybe I have something going on. So even if the first 3 things are agreeing for us, if the timing is off, this is not going to be a qualified donor to you. And then the 5th thing, which is very important, is permission. Are you giving me permission to reach out to you? And this is important because the survey or the conversation, and I want you to write this down, it is not an information gathering tool. It is an engagement tool. So the very act of completing the survey, it in and of itself is a tool of engagement. This is what we call a hand raising mechanism. In other words, what am I doing? How am I creating an on-ramp for people to say that they do want to engage with me? So that's the first step, but we're not done with qualification. Oh no, friends. Then we move into full qualification. Full qualification is a conversation. So when we fully qualify someone, we are looking at their survey, we're referring back to the survey, and doing 4 key things in the full qualification conversation. Thing number 1 is we're affirming their why. Why does this matter? Why is this a good fit for us? 2, we're affirming their timing. Is the timing right for us to do this? 3, we are positioning ourselves as a guide and mentor because every adventure has a guide and mentor. And if you do not accept me as a fundraiser, as a guide and mentor, there's no adventure here. And then the 4th, we issue an invitation. So here's where the rubber hits the road. Instead of where I see a lot of people making mistakes is that they think the initial conversation qualifies someone to be in their caseload. Instead, in this conversation, we make an invitation and we say something to the effect of, hey, so-and-so, I have heard what's important to you. What I would like to do is to introduce this concept that we have in our nonprofit where we actually create a plan for us to get to know each other. We calendarize it out with the idea being that we get to know you, you get to know us, and that ultimately, if and when the time is right, we co-create a proposal for funding together, but there's no commitment at this point. At this point, would you give me permission to create a plan for us? If they agree to that plan, then you create a plan. We have a very specific way of creating an engagement roadmap. We calendarize it out. We present the engagement roadmap, and it literally says, on July, we're going to do this. In September, we're going to do that. So there are no surprises. We have placeholders for their why, our story so far. There's a placeholder for a potential gift size. Again, there's some very specific ways that we talk about how we do that. And then once we present it, then and only then, after they accept the plan, are they in our caseload? Now, again, you'll notice there are a couple of points of consent. They consented first to take the survey. They consented to have a conversation. They consented to see the plan, and then they consented to do the plan. So at every single step, we are getting consent. They know what's happening. They know why we're doing what we're doing. There's transparency. Like these are very smart people. Okay. They don't appreciate the hiding the ball. And frankly, they know a lot more about their financial situation, their inclinations, and their interests than you do. Now, the mistake I see a lot of us making is that when we enter the cultivation phase, maybe we have a moves management menu, but that menu is rarely checked against what donors actually want to do. And so we come up with these ideas of like, well, maybe they want to do a site visit and maybe they want to sit down for a coffee. I don't know. Did you ask them? Everybody is different. Some people would rather not. Some people don't want to come to your site visit. Some people just want an email, right? So you need to tailor your approach to your specific donor. Now, remember, because we're talking about major gift donors, these are people who can give significant gifts. Now, obviously, you can't deliver this level of service for every single person who is giving to you. So there has to be a threshold at which this makes sense for a major giver. I would say, depending on your capacity, at a minimum 2,500, sort of on average, I'm looking at a 5-figure gift at a minimum, just because this does take a lot of time. Now, let's get back to it. So once you develop and agree to the engagement roadmap, they are now in your portfolio. This is what we know as traditionally the cultivation phase. At some point in the cultivation phase, you present, hey, so-and-so, now that we have gotten to know each other, would now be the time for us to co-create a proposal for funding. Now, in this cultivation phase, you're thinking about a couple of key things. One, you're trying to affirm their why. You got to find their why. Why does this matter to them? Why do they want what they want? What does it mean to them? Two, what of the things that we do are aligned with their why, right? Think of your role as a matchmaker. You're just aligning. And then three, the how. Once we get down to the why, the what, and the how, now we're talking about specifics like, okay, maybe it's a DAF gift, maybe it's some combination of a check and your family foundation, right? So once we get down to the nitty gritty, that's when we're pretty certain that the gift is going to come through. One example I have is a client of mine who started to implement the system. Her conversion rates before we started working together were about 40%. Once she started implementing the system, her conversion rates to a yes went up to 85%. Why is that? Because before this, she was spending a lot of time with people who really had no intention of giving, who weren't interested, didn't have capacity, didn't really want to be on this road with her. But because she built in these specific steps and got their consent, all of a sudden, they already knew why they were there. They already knew why she was calling her. All right, so let's get to the end. Now that we have the co-creation of proposal for funding, and by the way, this also alleviates the uncertainties. So many people ask me like, yeah, how do I know what to ask for or what thing they're going to fund? When you co-create a proposal, it is a conversation. There should never be any surprises. So by the time they actually receive the proposal, we've already talked about it, it's already aligned, and it's really just a formality at that point. And by the way, because we've talked about it, they've gotten all their ducks in a row. Now, once they agree to the gift, then we move into our stewardship phase. And the stewardship phase looks very similar to that of the cultivation phase, in that we are thinking about how do we create an experience that helps them to get the victory that they wanted when they first engaged with us, right? We all want something. We all want to believe that we're a certain kind of person. Maybe I want to say I'm the kind of person that saves whales, or I'm the kind of person that sends kids to college, or whatever it is. So the likelihood that I'm going to feel satisfied with the gift that I gave is that you, as the fundraiser, help me to understand the value of my gift. Like, what is the afterglow effect that I get from having done this incredible thing? I want to also be clear that the stewardship plan is not standardized. It is very customized. And as fundraisers, we have an opportunity to surprise and delight. So we have a very specific way that we put together a stewardship plan as well. All to say that when we have the right sequence and the right tactics in the right order and the right conversations, the giving becomes a delightful experience. And by the way, the gift, the stewardship, is the setting the stage for the next gift. Because you have been so thoughtful, because you have been so intentional, and because you have been consent-based, people feel like partners. And in fact, this one client that I'm referring to now literally has donors calling her up to say, that was so great. Can we do it again? because so many people have been used to this old way of doing things where they felt like ATMs, where they felt like there was this weird, fuzzy process. They didn't know what was happening. They didn't know when you were going to ask them for a gift. It was very awkward. And instead, by transitioning to a clear, transparent, and consent-based process, you give your donor a much better experience and you give yourself as a fundraiser a much better experience. You have transparency. And by the way, you also have a pipeline where you as a fundraiser know exactly what's in the pipeline because you have people who've opted into the process. So if this is interesting to you and you want to talk to us about how to build this major gift program in your own organization, you can click the link below and book a call with our team, and we can walk through what this could look like in your organization. Also, I have included an outline of this process below. So click it. It's a little cheat sheet for you. Can't wait to help you build a major gift pipeline for life in 2026.